Hi, I'm David Lukoff, and I have been at many Eurotas conferences in person and thoroughly enjoyed getting to meet people there. And I am now excited about the opportunity to present in this online format and hope we can generate a high level of sharing and discussion as we have at the face-to-face conferences. So I'm going to present today on the topic of spiritual emergencies. This has been a topic I've been very involved with throughout my 35-year career. And I'm going to give some background to this work in the field of transpersonal psychology, which has pioneered the understanding of spiritual crises. And then I'm going to talk more broadly about how this led to some work that I've been involved with on the broader topic of spiritual competencies, one of which will be to recognize a spiritual emergency and be able to distinguish it from psychopathology. But first, let me start by giving a PowerPoint on the topic of spiritual emergencies. And get my PowerPoint. So this is a quote by Rumi that I like because I think it gives a flavor of how we want to approach work in this area. And it goes, "The mystic dances in the sun, hearing music others don't. Insanity, the others say. If so, it's a very gentle, nourishing sort." So Rumi goes back about 800 years. So this is an understanding that's been around for a while, including in our Western tradition, where Socrates said, "Our greatest blessings come to us by way of madness, provided the madness is given us by divine gift." And even the Old Testament has something to say about this, where it uses the same term to refer to madness sent by God as a punishment for the disobedient and to describe the behavior of prophets. So you can see some overlap in that. And this has been recognized throughout history in the initiatory crises of shamans, the experience of yogis, the founders of religions like Jesus and Muhammad, the trials and tribulations of Buddhist teachers like Padmasambhava, as well as St. John, St. Anthony, and St. Teresa, and Meister Eckhart, and so on. So understanding that people who are on a spiritual path can have a spiritual crisis has been part of the general understanding of the nature of a spiritual path. Anthropologists have recognized this as well, Raymond Prince being one. And this is a quote of his: "Highly similar mental and behavioral states may be designated psychiatric disorders in some cultural settings and religious experiences in others. Within cultures that invest these unusual states with meaning and provide the individual experiencing them with institutional support, at least a proportion of them may be contained and channeled into socially valuable roles." And in the mental health field, in addition to Stan and Christina Groff, who coined the term spiritual emergencies, there have been other terms by other mental health professionals that have recognized the nature of positive transformational episodes that can appear as episodes of psychosis. Dabrowski used the term positive disintegration. Ellenberger used the term creative illness. Lang used metanoic voyages. And John Perry used the term visionary states. And in my own work in the early 80s, I used the term mystical experiences with psychotic features in my own writing. But let's take a look at what Stanislav and Christina Groff, how they define spiritual emergency. as a crisis related to sudden spiritual emergence, during which the process of growth and change becomes chaotic and overwhelming. And in such episodes, individuals often suddenly and dramatically enter into new realms of mystical and spiritual experience. However, they may also become fearful and confused and have difficulty coping with their daily lives, jobs, and relationships. In 1980, Christina Groff founded the Spiritual Emergency Network, which was first located at the Esalen Institute, and then later it moved to the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. At another point, they were located in Santa Cruz, and at another point, they were located in San Francisco at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And now they exist as a website that is part of the Stan and Christina Groff Foundation. Also, there are chapters or branches of SEN in many countries in the world. Part of the rationale for founding SEN was that often the most challenging part of a spiritual emergency is not the spiritual emergency itself, but, to quote Jackson, the most subjectively frightening aspect of their experience was psychiatric hospitalization itself. In other words, many people, including people at Esalen, attending workshops, who had these kinds of experiences and were sent to a hospital, found that far more frightening than the experience itself. And these kinds of experiences are certainly occurring more and more often. And I think Mariana Kaplan captured one of the reasons for this when she said, whereas spiritual masters have been warning their disciples for thousands of years about the dangers of playing with mystical states, the contemporary spiritual scene is like a candy store where any casual spiritual tourist can sample the goodies that promise a variety of mystical highs. So nowadays, people can go to YouTube or buy CDs or DVDs with the kinds of practices that in former times, up until really very recently, one would have had to study at the foot of a master who would guide one through some of the challenging transitions and ecstatic states. And now one can achieve these types of mystical states without having any grounding, any preparation, or any guidance. That was one of the things that led Francis Liu and me to propose a diagnostic category for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which in the United States is kind of called the Bible of mental health. Everybody who is a mental health professional has to study it and utilize its diagnostic categories in all of their assessments. So it was a kind of breakthrough for the field of transpersonal psychology to get recognition of spiritual emergencies by a category. So the category we named religious or spiritual problem to conform with the language of the DSM. But our initial thought was to focus on spiritual crises, although as we worked on the proposal, it evolved to include a broader range of religious as well as spiritual issues that people bring into their therapy. So the definition in the DSM reads, this category can be used when the focus of clinical attention is a religious or spiritual problem. Examples include distressing experiences that involve loss or questioning of faith, problems associated with conversion to a new faith, or questioning of other spiritual values, which may not necessarily be related to an organized church or a religious institution. And this was also included in the more recent 2013 DSM-5. And as to what are included as spiritual problems, the DSM category did not list any specific ones, but through literature reviews and searches, we have been able to identify three basic kinds, one of which are visionary spiritual experiences. That would include mystical experiences, near-death experiences, psychic experiences, and alien abduction experiences, where a person is essentially experiencing an altered state of consciousness that is not in tune with ordinary consensual reality and can cause some conflicts because of that disparity. But there are also a variety of spiritual practice-related spiritual problems. Kundalini crisis is perhaps the most well-known, which can occur when a person engages in yogic practices and perhaps taps into some of the Kundalini energy at a point where they're not fully prepared to be able to handle it. But these kinds of crises also occur during meditation retreats and can also occur in association with practices like Qigong. Possession is well recognized cross-culturally, and yet in the Western culture, it is not as well recognized. So it is often an experience that people who are immigrants might encounter. But for example, many of these are increasing in incidence. So the Gallup poll for many years has asked, have you ever been influenced by a presence, a power, God? And in 1973, only 27% of people acknowledged having had such an experience. But by 2001, it was a majority of the population, 2/3, who acknowledged having these kinds of experiences. And in addition, more and more people are having near-death experiences due to the advances in medical technology, which have brought people back from the brink of death. And this is a whole area of study where components of the near-death experience have been identified. And yet, many people who have had NDEs also experience some disruption in their ability to cope with everyday reality, their jobs, families, and so on. So it can be quite disruptive, even though studies show that 5 years later, people have benefited from those same experiences. And there is a whole literature on what are called culture-bound psychiatric disorders associated with Qigong practice. There's a literature on Kundalini as well. And as more people participate in yoga and Qigong, I think we can expect that these incidents will also increase. And the same with UFO abductions. I haven't seen a study that showed that these are actually increasing at this point in time, but they are still part of our culture with people reporting such encounters. So how do we identify such visionary spiritual experiences? Well, it is first incumbent on us as mental health professionals, when somebody reports unusual experiences, to rule out medical illness or medication effects that can also trigger altered state experiences. And then the second dimension of this is to identify when a person's experience overlaps with one of the known experiences, like a mystical experience or UFO experience or Kundalini crises. So that requires some training. And Jung used to advocate that all psychiatrists and psychologists got such training. And nowadays that is not routine, but I think it is a part of the preparation that should go into training every mental health professional, so they'll recognize when a client is having a mystical experience. And then there are certain signs, prognostic indicators of a positive outcome, and I will talk about that in a second. And then another factor is whether this person is a risk for homicidal or suicidal behavior, because that would require perhaps some additional constraints where maybe they would not be able to be worked with on an outpatient basis. I think in the vast majority of cases where people are having visionary spiritual experiences, they could be worked with on an outpatient basis. But as a psychologist, I am legally responsible for making a determination if somebody is at risk for homicidal or suicidal behavior. So that has to be acknowledged in this domain as well. So for a mystical experience, one should be able to recognize the mood as a kind of euphoric or ecstatic mood. That the individual has that sense of gnosis or newly discovered knowledge. They might have perceptual alterations like visions or hallucinations. And they might have beliefs, which would be called delusions in mainstream mental health, that have religious and mythical themes. So that's what one would look for if one was seeing overlap with a mystical experience. So I mentioned prognostic indicators, one of which is, was there good pre-episode functioning? In other words, before this crisis, were they holding a job? Were they able to be in school or graduate from high school or college? Did they have a boyfriend or girlfriend? Those are signs of good pre-episode functioning. Was there an acute episode of symptoms? Or did it come on rather suddenly over a period of 3 months or less, rather than what's called an insidious onset, where the symptoms kind of gradually come on? Was there a stressful precipitant? Also a positive prognostic indicator. Does the individual have a positive exploratory attitude toward the experience? Another positive, good prognostic sign. And absence of conceptual disorganization and confusion. And that's yet another good prognostic indicator. So that was a little bit of background on the